Lyra spent the next 3 weeks verifying the data. She ran every simulation twice. She cross-referenced the genetic models against 4 separate databases. She used different software, different parameters, different assumptions. Every single time, the result came back the same. Human genetic material was not just compatible with Selvari biology. It was remarkably, almost impossibly well-suited to it. She presented her findings to Dr. Cale Orathan, the senior director of the cross-species compatibility study. Cale was old by Selvari standards, over 200 cycles, with deep lines on his silver face, and eyes that had seen too many failed experiments to get excited easily. He sat behind his desk, read through her data in silence, and then read it again. "You are certain?" he asked. "I have verified it 11 times, Lyra said. 11. He set the datapad down. "You know what this means, if it holds." "Yes." "You know what the council will say." "What the purists will say." "Yes." Cale studied her for a long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and let out a breath that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "Find a willing human participant," he said. "Someone healthy, genetically stable, and someone you trust. If we move forward with this, it cannot be with a stranger. The political risks are too high. This has to be handled with care." Lyra already knew who she would ask. She did not go to Ethan right away. She spent another week preparing herself, rehearsing what she would say, trying to find the right words in a language that was not her own. She was not afraid of the science. She was afraid of what it would mean to ask this man, this kind and simple and unexpectedly deep human man, to do something that would change both their lives forever. She found him in the agricultural bay on level 14, elbow deep in soil, coaxing a row of seedlings into life under artificial light. He looked up when she walked in, and smiled at her the way he always did, open and easy, like seeing her was the best part of his day. "Lyra," he said, wiping his hands on his shirt, "you look serious. More serious than usual, I mean, and you usually look pretty serious." She almost smiled. Almost. "I need to talk to you," she said. "It is important." They sat on a bench between rows of growing plants, surrounded by the smell of damp earth and green things. Lyra told him everything. She told him about the fertility crisis in detail, about the centuries of decline, about the children who were never born, and the families that never formed. She told him about the cross-species compatibility study. She told him about the data, the simulations, the results that defied everything her people thought they knew. And then she told him what she was asking. "I need a human participant," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands, folded in her lap, were not. "The science requires a controlled biological trial, a single attempt, monitored and documented. If it fails, we adjust and try again. If it succeeds," she paused, "if it succeeds, it changes everything." Ethan was quiet for a long time. He looked at the seedlings beside them, tiny green shoots reaching toward the light. "You are asking me to help you have a child," he said. "I am asking you to participate in a reproductive trial." "Lyra," she met his eyes. "Yes, I'm asking you to help me have a child." He nodded slowly. He did not laugh. He did not look uncomfortable. He looked like a man thinking carefully about something that mattered. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you are genetically suitable. Your health markers are strong. Your immune profile is clean." "What is the real reason?" Lyra opened her mouth, closed it, and then said something she had not planned to say. "Because I trust you. Because in all the time I have known you, you have never once made me feel like a specimen or a project or a representative of my species. You have treated me like a person. And if I am going to do this, if I am going to bring a child into existence through a process that half my people will call a miracle and the other half will call a mistake, Then I need the other half of that child to come from someone good. Someone real. She swallowed. Someone like you. The agricultural bay was quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the grow lights and the gentle drip of the irrigation system. Okay, Ethan said. Okay, I will do it. Not because of the science. I mean, the science matters, and I understand that. But I am doing it because you asked me. Because this matters to you. And because, if I can help, I should. Lyra felt something inside her chest shift, a tightness she had been carrying for months, loosening just slightly. She had prepared herself for questions, for hesitation, for negotiation. She had not prepared herself for simple, quiet kindness. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation, medical screenings, genetic mapping, biological synchronization protocols that required Lyra to take a series of supplements to optimize her reproductive cycle. Ethan endured his own battery of tests with good humor, joking with the Selvari medical staff, who found him baffling and oddly charming. They spent more time together than ever during this phase. Long hours in the medical wing gave way to longer hours in the observation lounge, talking about things that had nothing to do with the study. He taught her to play poker, which she was terrible at because her face gave away nothing, but she could not understand the concept of bluffing. She taught him basic Selvari calligraphy, guiding his hand across the page with a patience he found touching. Tesmeron watched all of this from a careful distance. She was loyal to Lyra, had been since their academy days, and she could see what was happening between them, even if neither Lyra nor Ethan had named it yet. It worried her, not because she disapproved, but because she knew how complicated things were about to become. The day of the first attempt arrived. The medical team prepared a private room in the research wing. Everything was monitored, documented, and controlled. Cale Orathan reviewed the protocols one final time and gave his approval. Before they went in, Ethan touched Lyra's arm. "Hey," he said, "whatever happens, it is going to be okay." She looked at him, this strange, warm, impossibly calm human man, and she believed him. The procedure was handled with dignity. The medical team recorded their data and left them in privacy. When it was done, Lyra lay still and stared at the ceiling, feeling the same thing she always felt after a significant moment, the quiet awareness that the universe had shifted, even if she could not yet see how. She expected nothing from this first attempt. Among Selvari, the first attempt was simply a starting point, a way to calibrate the biology for the long process ahead. First attempts never worked. Never. She closed her eyes and waited for the days to pass. 3 days later, Lyra walked into the medical wing for the standard post-procedure scan. She was calm. She had done this kind of analysis 100 times in simulations, and she knew exactly what to expect. The first attempt would show baseline data, nothing more. Maybe some early cellular activity, maybe not even that. The real work would begin with the second attempt, and the third, and the 10th. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. The medical technician, a quiet Selvari named Doran, ran the scanner across her abdomen. He looked at the screen. Then he stopped moving. "Dr. Vainshi," he said. "Yes? Could you hold still for a moment?" She held still. Doran ran the scan again. He stared at the screen with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something between disbelief and fear. "What is it?" Lyra asked. "You need to see this." She sat up and looked at the display. Cellular adhesion markers were active. Genetic integration was already underway. Hormone levels had shifted into a pattern that she recognized immediately. A pattern she had studied in textbooks, but had rarely seen in real medical data because it was so uncommon among her people. She was pregnant. From a single attempt. "Run it again," she said. Doran ran it again. Same result. "Use the secondary scanner," she said. He switched equipment. Same result. "Bring in the portable unit from Lab 3. Same result. Every machine, every method, every approach told the same story. There was a viable embryo developing inside her, strong and stable, with cellular markers that looked healthier than anything in the Salvari medical literature. Lyra sat on the edge of the examination table and did not speak for a very long time. Her hands rested on her knees. Her breathing was slow and controlled, but her mind was racing faster than it ever had. This was not supposed to happen. Not like this. Not from a single attempt. Not with such speed and strength. The Salvari had been struggling to conceive for 300 years, and a human man from Montana had done what the greatest scientific minds of her civilization could not do, in one try. She asked Doran to keep the results confidential until she could inform the research director. Then she stood up, straightened her clothing, and walked out of the medical wing. Her steps were steady. Her face showed nothing. Inside, she was shaking. She went to Ethan's quarters. It was evening, and he was reading something on a datapad, some agricultural journal about soil composition on low-gravity worlds. He looked up when his door chimed, and smiled when he saw her. Then, the smile faded. "What happened?" he asked, standing up quickly. "Are you all right? Did something go wrong?" She walked inside. The door closed behind her. She stood in the middle of his small room, surrounded by the ordinary details of a human life. A jacket thrown over a chair, a half-empty cup of coffee on the desk, a photograph of green mountains pinned to the wall, and she told him. "It worked," she said. "The first attempt. I am pregnant." Ethan stared at her. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then sat down on the edge of his bed very slowly, like a man who had just been told the ground beneath him was no longer solid. "The first attempt," he repeated. "Yes. But you said that never happens. You said the first attempt is just a starting point." "It is. It was. It has never happened before in recorded Salvari history." Ethan looked at his hands, then at her, then at his hands again. "Are you okay?" he asked. Of all the things he could have said, of all the questions about science and history and what this meant for her species, he asked the simplest one, the most human one. Lyra felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but opening. A wall she had built so carefully over years of training and discipline and careful emotional control developed a fracture that she could not repair. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I think I am. I think I will be. But right now, I do not know." He stood up and crossed the room to her. He did not touch her. He just stood close. Close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his skin, that strange human warmth that the Salvari did not have. And he said, "Then we will figure it out. We. Not you. We." The news reached Cale Orathan within the hour. The old researcher read the medical report 3 times. He called in his entire senior team. They verified the data independently. They ran genetic analysis on the embryo. They checked the synchronization logs, the hormone records, every piece of documentation from the procedure. Everything checked out. It was real. "This changes everything," Cale said quietly, standing in his office with the lights dimmed and the weight of 3 centuries of decline pressing down on his shoulders. Everything. The research team was placed under strict confidentiality protocols, but secrets on a space station travel fast. Within a week, rumors were circulating among the Salvari diplomatic staff. Within 2 weeks, the rumors had reached the Salvari High Council on Salvara. The council's reaction was divided. Elder Maven, the head of the council, called it the most significant biological discovery since the Salvari first mapped their own genome. Councillor Dreth, leader of the traditionalist faction, called it an abomination. Others fell somewhere in between, hopeful but cautious, excited but afraid of what it meant. The other species on Helix Arch noticed the change in the Salvari around them. The silver-blue aliens, always composed, always controlled, were suddenly distracted. They whispered in corridors. They held meetings behind closed doors. Something had happened. Nobody outside the Selvari knew exactly what. The Drelith noticed too. Their ambassador, a tall, sharp-featured male named Vorath Kes, began paying closer attention to the human delegation. He had never cared about humans before. They were short-lived, emotional, and unremarkable by galactic standards. But something had changed, and Vorath Kes had not survived decades of galactic politics by ignoring changes. Meanwhile, the embryo grew. Faster than expected, healthier than expected. The medical team monitored it daily and marveled at the readings. The genetic integration between Selvari and human DNA was not just stable, it was thriving, as though the two biologies had been waiting for each other across the vast distances of space and evolution. One evening, 3 weeks after the news, Ethan and Lyra sat together on the observation deck. The stars hung in the blackness beyond the viewport like scattered dust, millions of points of light that did not care about politics or species or the small, enormous miracle growing inside a woman who had never expected it. "She is strong," Lyra said. She had started referring to the embryo as she, though it was too early to know. It was instinct, something she could not explain. "Of course she is," Ethan said. "Look at her mother." But there was something in his face, in the steady calm of his brown eyes, that made her feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. She reached out and placed her hand over his. His fingers were warm. Hers were cool. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars, saying nothing, and letting the silence hold everything that words could not. The announcement came on a cold morning, station time. The Selvari High Council, after weeks of internal debate, authorized a formal statement to the Galactic Commonwealth Assembly. The words were carefully chosen, measured and diplomatic, but the meaning behind them shook the galaxy like a tremor through deep rock. A Selvari female and a human male had achieved viable conception on the first attempt. The cross-species compatibility study had produced results that exceeded all projections. The Selvari fertility crisis, the slow death sentence that had hung over their civilization for 300 years, might finally have an answer. And that answer was human. The reaction was immediate and enormous. News feeds across dozens of worlds carried the story. Commentary, analysis, speculation, and argument flooded every communication channel in the Commonwealth. Species that had barely noticed humanity now turned their full attention toward the small, short-lived, emotionally loud species from the third planet of an unremarkable star. Ethan Cole became famous overnight. His face appeared on galactic broadcasts. His name was discussed in council chambers on worlds he had never heard of. Diplomatic representatives from 7 different species requested meetings with him. Journalists, researchers, and political operatives all wanted a piece of the man who had done the impossible. He hated every second of it. "I am an agricultural engineer," he told Lyra one evening, sitting at recorders while another wave of interview requests piled up on his communication terminal. "I grow vegetables. I am not a galactic figure." "You are now," Lyra said. There was a trace of sympathy in her voice, and also something that might have been amusement. "The galaxy does not care what you think you are. It cares what you did." "But what we did," he corrected. She looked at him, and for a moment, the composed mask she wore in public slipped just enough for him to see the warmth underneath. "What we did," she agreed. The political consequences unfolded rapidly. The Selvari High Council convened an emergency session to discuss how to proceed. Elder Maven pushed for an immediate expansion of the program, calling for the identification of human volunteers and the establishment of formal reproductive partnerships on a large scale. Her argument was simple and urgent. Their species was running out of time, and the solution was standing right in front of them. Councillor Dreth pushed back hard. He stood before the council, and argued that what they were proposing was not salvation, but surrender. Salvari children should come from Salvari parents. The introduction of human genetic material into their species was not a cure. It was a dilution, a betrayal of everything the Salvari had been for thousands of years. Lyra was called to testify before the council via secure communication link. She sat in a private room on Helix Arch, facing a screen full of the most powerful people on her world. And she spoke with a clarity and conviction that surprised even herself. "I understand the fear," she said. "I felt it too. But fear does not make children. Fear does not fill empty nurseries or bring laughter back to silent homes. I am carrying a child right now, a child who is half Salvari and half human, and she is the healthiest embryo our doctors have seen in living memory. We can argue about purity and tradition, or we can choose to survive. I have made my choice." The council voted to continue the program under strict ethical guidelines. Participation would be voluntary on both sides. No human would be pressured or coerced. No Salvari would be forced. Every pairing would require informed consent, psychological evaluation, and ongoing support. But not everyone was satisfied. Vorath Kess, the Drelith ambassador, had been watching the situation with the patience of a predator. The Drelith and the Salvari had competed for influence within the Commonwealth for generations. A revitalized Salvari population, bolstered by an alliance with humanity, would shift the balance of power in ways that the Drelith found deeply threatening. Vorath made his move at the next Commonwealth Assembly session. He stood before the assembled representatives of 42 species and delivered a carefully worded objection. The cross-species compatibility study, he argued, was exploitative. Humans were a younger, less advanced species. Using them as biological resources, no matter how the Salvari dressed it up in the language of consent and partnership, was a violation of Commonwealth ethics. It was a cynical argument. Everyone in the room knew that Vorath Kess did not care about human welfare. The Drelith had never shown the slightest interest in humanity before this moment. But the argument was effective because it touched a nerve. Several species, uncomfortable with the implications of cross-species reproduction, voiced their support for a formal review. The program was temporarily frozen, pending investigation. Lyra was furious. She paced her quarters like a caged animal, something Ethan had never seen her do. The Salvari were known for their composure. Seeing Lyra lose hers told him more about her emotional state than any words could. "He does not care about humans," she said. "He does not care about consent or ethics. He wants my people to keep dying, so his people can fill the space we leave behind." "I know," Ethan said. "And the assembly is listening to him. Some of them are, not all." She stopped pacing and looked at him. "How are you so calm?" He shrugged. "I grew up in Montana. We had droughts that lasted 3 years. You learn not to panic when the rain stops. You just keep working the soil and wait." Behind the scenes, the situation became more dangerous. Ethan noticed it before anyone else did. His work in the agricultural bay required him to monitor environmental systems across the station: temperature, humidity, atmospheric composition, things that most people never thought about. One evening, he noticed a series of small anomalies in the sensor network near the research wing. Tiny fluctuations that could have been equipment glitches, but they formed a pattern, and the pattern looked deliberate. He reported it to station security. They were skeptical at first. A human farmer telling them about sensor irregularities was not exactly top priority intelligence. But Ethan insisted, and when they finally investigated, they found what he had suspected: a Drelith surveillance device, small, sophisticated, and positioned to intercept data transmissions from Lyra's laboratory. The discovery of the device changed the political dynamic. The Drelith had overplayed their hand. Vorath Kess denied any involvement, but the evidence was clear, and the Commonwealth Assembly was not pleased. Espionage against a sanctioned research program was a serious violation. The formal review was completed in record time. The program was cleared to continue. Vorath Kess left the assembly chamber with a face like carved stone. He said nothing to the reporters waiting outside. But as he passed his aide in the corridor, he spoke quietly. "This is not over." The aide nodded and said nothing. Back on Helix Arch, Ethan and Lyra stood in her quarters. The tension of the past weeks had taken its toll on both of them. They were tired, wrung out, and standing closer to each other than they ever had before. "Ethan," Lyra said, "why did you agree to this? The real reason, not the one you gave me before." He was quiet for a moment, then he spoke. "Because of you," he said. "Not your species, not the science. You. Because you walked into my life, and you were brilliant and sad and brave, and I wanted to help you. Because every time I see you, I feel like the ground is more solid under my feet. Because I did not agree to father a child for the Selvari people. I agreed because you asked me, because you matter to me." Lyra stood very still. The room was silent, and then a single tear traced down her silver-blue cheek, slow and bright, catching the light like a jewel. Among the Selvari, who prized emotional control above almost everything, this was the most vulnerable she had ever allowed herself to be. "You matter to me too," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient, patient turning, indifferent to the small, enormous things happening in the lives of two people who had not planned on any of this. 7 months passed, and the galaxy kept turning. Lyra's pregnancy progressed with a strength and speed that astonished the medical team on Helix Arch. Selvari pregnancies were typically fragile things, requiring constant monitoring, chemical support, and careful management of the mother's biological systems. Lyra needed none of it. Her body adapted to the pregnancy as though it had been designed for exactly this, which the geneticists began to suspect it might have been. Somewhere deep in the shared evolutionary history of carbon-based life, the building blocks of Selvari and human biology had developed along parallel lines. And when they came together, they did not clash. They harmonized. The child growing inside her was predominantly Selvari in form. Silver-blue skin, the angular bone structure, the elongated limbs. But there were human traces too. A slight warmth in her complexion, a faint blush of color beneath the silver. The Selvari heart was efficient and quiet, a precision instrument that beat softly like a clock behind a wall. This child's heart beat loud. It beat strong. The doctors could hear it on their instruments from across the room, a steady, powerful drumming that sounded less like a Selvari pulse and more like a human one. "She has her father's heart," Tess Moran said one afternoon, reviewing the latest scans. Lyra placed her hand on her abdomen and felt the beating beneath her fingers. She said nothing, but she smiled, a real smile, rare and unguarded. Ethan had changed too, in his own quiet way. He had learned conversational Selvari over the past months, stumbling through the musical language with the same stubborn patience he brought to everything. He studied their customs, their art, their history. He read Selvari poetry, which he found beautiful, even when he did not fully understand it. He attended cultural lectures on the station, sitting among silver-blue faces with his human warmth and his brown eyes, listening carefully and asking questions that were always simpler and more insightful than the Selvari expected. He was not trying to become Selvari. He was trying to understand the world his daughter would be born into, so he could stand beside her in it without being a stranger. Lyra watched this quiet effort and loved him for it, though she did not say the word aloud. The Selvari did not use the word love the way humans did. They had a different word, deeper and harder to translate, something closer to a permanent recognition, a soul-level acknowledgement that another being had become part of the structure of your existence. She felt it every time she looked at him. The program had expanded carefully in the months since the assembly vote. 12 more human Sylvari pairings had been established across 3 stations, all voluntary, all built on genuine connection between the participants. Not all succeeded on the first attempt. Some took 2 or 3, but the success rates were extraordinary compared to Sylvari-only reproduction. And for the first time in 300 years, the demographic projections for the Sylvari species began to curve upward. It was a small curve, a gentle one, but it pointed toward life instead of death, and that made all the difference. Humanity's place in the Commonwealth shifted with it. The species that had been treated as newcomers, as short-lived curiosities, who punched above their weight but would never truly belong, found themselves welcomed at tables they had previously been excluded from. Human scientists were recruited into Sylvari research programs. Human diplomats found their calls returned faster. Human cultural exchange programs expanded. It was not that humanity had suddenly become powerful. It was that they had become necessary. And more than that, they had become trusted. Ethan and Lyra bonded formally on a quiet afternoon in the observation lounge. The ceremony was Sylvari in tradition, adapted to include human elements that Ethan had suggested, and Lyra had approved with a warmth that surprised her own people. He wore the traditional Sylvari bonding sash across his chest, deep blue fabric embroidered with silver thread. On his left hand he wore a simple silver ring, a human tradition that Lyra found sentimental and oddly moving. She wore white as Sylvari custom required, and she carried a small sprig of green leaves that Ethan had grown himself in the agricultural bay, a Montana tradition, he told her, where the groom gives the bride something living to symbolize growth. The ceremony was small. Cale Orathan attended, standing in the back with his arms folded, and his old eyes shining. Tess Mirren stood as witness and cried quietly throughout the entire thing, which she would deny vigorously for years afterward. A handful of human colleagues from the station came, along with a few Sylvari friends who had come to see Ethan as one of their own. There were no speeches, no grand declarations. Ethan held Lyra's hands and said simply, "I am yours." Lyra held his and said, "And I am yours." In Sylvari tradition, that was enough. The birth came on a station morning when the artificial lights were just beginning to brighten from their nighttime dim. Lyra woke Ethan with a touch on his shoulder, her face calm, but her grip on his arm tight enough to leave marks. "It is time," she said. The medical bay was prepared. Both Sylvari and human doctors were present, working together with a coordination that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Lyra lay on the medical bed, monitors attached, lights low, her silver-blue face set with a determination that the medical staff would later describe as almost frightening. Ethan sat beside her and held her hand. She gripped it through every contraction with a strength that turned his knuckles white. He did not pull away. He did not flinch. He just held on and talked to her in a low, steady voice, telling her about Montana, about the fields in spring, about the first green shoots breaking through the cold ground, about how the hardest part of growing anything was the waiting and the trusting, and then, suddenly, the arrival. The child was born just after dawn, station time. She was small, she was perfect. Her skin was silver blue, like her mother's, but with a warmth underneath, a faint undertone of living color that no pure-blooded Sylvari had ever carried. Her features were delicate, Sylvari in structure, but softened around the edges, the cheekbones a little less sharp, the chin a little rounder. And her eyes, when she opened them for the first time, were brown. Deep, warm, human brown, like Montana soil, like coffee, like the earth itself. She cried. Among the Sylvari, infants were born quiet. It was a biological trait, a species-level adaptation to a world of subtle sounds, and soft voices. Selvari babies entered the world in silence and found their voices slowly over the following days. This child did not enter the world in silence. She screamed, a full, loud, unashamed, impossibly powerful cry that filled the medical bay and echoed off the walls and made every Selvari in the room freeze in place. It was a sound none of them had ever heard from a newborn before. It was raw and alive and defiant. A tiny body announcing to the universe that she was here and she was not going to be quiet about it. Tess Moran, standing near the door, put her hand over her mouth and laughed through her tears. Ethan looked down at his daughter, this impossible, beautiful, screaming child, and felt his own eyes fill with water. He looked at Lyra, who was exhausted and radiant and crying silently, silver tears tracing lines down her cheeks, and he said the only thing he could think of. She has got a good set of lungs. Lyra laughed. It was a weak, tired, wonderful sound. They named her Ayla. It was a Selvari word that meant first light, the moment before dawn, when the darkness begins to lift, and the sky holds its breath before the sun arrives. It was a name for beginnings, a name for hope. 1 year later, Ethan and Lyra stood on the observation deck of Helix Arch, the same spot where they had sat so many times before. Ayla was with them, 13 months old and toddling on unsteady legs, her small silver-blue hands reaching for everything she could touch. She had her mother's grace and her father's stubbornness. She fell down constantly and got back up every single time, which the Selvari doctors noted was unusual for a child her age, and which Ethan said was perfectly normal for a kid from Montana, even if she had never been there. Lyra watched her daughter wobble toward the viewport, pressing her small hands against the glass, staring at the stars with wide brown eyes. "I used to think we were dying," Lyra said quietly. "I used to think the story of my people was a long, slow ending, that we were a beautiful thing that was fading, and all we could do was fade with dignity." Ethan stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "And now?" he asked. "Now I think the story was never about dying. It was about waiting. Waiting until the right people found each other." Ayla slapped her palms against the viewport and babbled something in a language that was neither Selvari nor English, but entirely her own. Then she turned, wobbled back to Ethan, and reached up with both arms. He picked her up. She grabbed his nose immediately, which she did every single time, and laughed with the pure, unself-conscious joy of a child who did not know she was a miracle. Ethan looked at Lyra over their daughter's head. "I am just a guy from Montana who grows things," he said. "Maybe that is what humans do. We find ground that everyone else gave up on, and we make something grow." He held her close with one arm, held their daughter with the other, and stood there on the observation deck of a space station, orbiting a world he had not known existed 5 years ago, surrounded by stars and silence, and the vast, patient darkness of a universe that had room, still, for new beginnings. Ayla babbled at the stars. The stars, as always, said nothing back. The diplomatic station called Helix Arc floated in the darkness of space like a great silver wheel, slowly turning above the pale green world of Velun Prime. Inside its long corridors and wide-open halls, dozens of alien species walked, talked, argued, and tried to get along. It was the year 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Commonwealth for just over 40 years. They were still the new ones, still the species that other races looked at with polite curiosity and quiet doubt. Ethan Cole did not care much about galactic politics. He was 32 years old, originally from a small town in Montana, where the sky stretched so wide it made a man feel both tiny and free at the same time. He had trained as an agricultural engineer, someone who understood soil and seeds and growth cycles. The Commonwealth Exchange Program had brought him to Helix Arc to help with food production systems for multi-species stations. It was good work. He liked it. Tonight, however, he was not thinking about soil. He was standing in the middle of a diplomatic reception hall, holding a tray of alien appetizers he could not identify, trying very hard not to drop anything. The room was full of species he had only read about. Tall insectoid Dralith with their sharp black eyes. Squat stone-skinned Gorathi who laughed like rolling thunder. And the Selvari, the elegant silver-blue humanoids who seemed to glide rather than walk, their every movement smooth and deliberate like water flowing downhill. It was a Selvari woman he bumped into. He turned too quickly, the tray tilted, and something that looked like a purple mushroom rolled off the edge and bounced off her arm. She looked down at it. Then she looked at him. She was tall, almost a full head taller than Ethan. Her skin was a pale silver blue that seemed to catch the light in a way human skin never could. Her eyes were deep violet, large and sharp and full of intelligence. Her features were angular but not harsh, beautiful in a way that felt alien and familiar at the same time. "I am so sorry," Ethan said, grabbing the fallen mushroom thing off the floor. "I have no idea what this is, but I promise it was on the tray 2 seconds ago." She studied him for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "It is a fermented Kelath pod," she said. Her voice was smooth and clear, with a slight musical quality that all Selvari voices carried. "It is considered a delicacy on my homeworld." "Is it good?" "It is terrible," she said, "but we eat it at formal events because tradition demands it." Ethan laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded and warm, and it seemed to surprise her. Most species on the station spoke to Selvari with careful formality. Ethan spoke to her like she was a person standing in front of him at a party, which, of course, she was. "I am Ethan," he said. "Ethan Cole. I grow things for the station." "Lyra Vainshi," she replied. "I study living things." That was how it started. Over the next several days, they kept running into each other. The station was large, but the common areas were not, and Ethan had a habit of eating lunch in the observation lounge, where Lyra often came to read. They talked. Small things at first. He told her about Montana, about the wide fields and the cold winters, and how the first green shoots in spring always felt like a small miracle. She told him about Selvara, her homeworld, a planet of vast oceans and floating cities where the light was always soft and the air smelled like rain. Not just because she was alien, but because she was sharp, honest, and carried a sadness in her that she never quite named. He learned about the Selvari fertility crisis in pieces. Not from Lyra at first, but from station news feeds, from conversations with other researchers, from the quiet weight that seemed to hang over every Selvari he met. Their species was dying. Not from war, not from disease. They simply could not have children anymore, not easily. Conception among Selvari pairs took dozens of attempts, sometimes hundreds, stretched over years. Many couples never succeeded at all. Their population had been falling for 3 centuries, slowly and steadily, like sand running out of a glass. Ethan did not fully understand the science, but he understood the feeling. He had watched drought kill crops back home. He knew what it looked like when something alive just stopped growing. Lyra, he eventually learned, was not just any xenobiologist. She was one of the lead researchers on a classified project called the Cross-Species Compatibility Study. The idea was simple and desperate. If Selvari biology could no longer sustain reproduction on its own, perhaps the answer lay in the genetics of another species. The Commonwealth had funded the project quietly, aware that it was controversial. Some Selvari saw it as hope, others saw it as surrender. Lyra saw it as necessary. She did not tell Ethan any of this directly. Not yet. But he noticed the late nights, the tension in her shoulders when she came back from her lab, the way she sometimes stared out the observation lounge window as if looking for an answer in the stars. One evening, she sat beside him and said nothing for a long time. Then she asked him a strange question. Do humans ever feel like your bodies know something your minds do not? Ethan thought about it. My grandfather used to say that the body remembers things the brain forgets. He meant it about farming, about knowing when the rain was coming just from the way the air felt. But I think it is true about other things too. Lyra looked at him with those violet eyes, and there was something in her gaze that he could not read. Something between curiosity and wonder, and a quiet, careful hope. That same night she returned to her lab and opened the latest report from her research team. The genetic modeling data had come back, and the results made no sense. Human DNA, of all things, showed an extraordinary degree of compatibility with Selvari reproductive biology. The protein markers aligned, the cellular receptors matched. The simulations predicted not just viability, but efficiency far beyond anything seen in Selvari-only pairings. Her colleague, a senior geneticist named Tess Miran, stood beside her, reading the same data. This has to be an error, Tess said. Lyra stared at the numbers on the screen. She thought about a man from Montana who grew things for a living, and laughed easily, and asked simple questions that somehow reached deeper than anyone expected. Maybe, Lyra said quietly, but I do not think it is. She saved the file and sat alone in the blue light of her lab for a long time, thinking about what came next.